McDermott has worn many hats throughout his career. Legislator, council member, and tour guide, to name just a few. That's right, Joe put his history degree to use, leading underground tours in Seattle's Pioneer Square, just a few blocks and an elevator ride from his office on the 12th floor of the courthouse. A third-generation West Seattleite, Joe represented District 34 in the state legislature for a decade. In 2010, he officially moved into the courthouse after winning a seat on the King County Council representing District 8. Joe would be re-elected for 3 consecutive terms. He was the first openly gay member to serve on council.
Going to the chapel and we're gonna get married.
After working on marriage equality legislation in Olympia, Joe and his husband, Michael Culpepper, were on hand as King County issued its first same-sex marriage licenses in 2012. While on the council, he created the King County Gun Safety Action Plan, a package of legislation addressing everything from safe storage to confiscated weapons. As chair of the King County Board of Health, he established the first producer-paid secure medicine return program in the state.
I certainly hear fireworks in my neighborhood.
He helped pass a ban on commercial fireworks in unincorporated King County. He also sponsored the original Best Starts for Kids levy and its renewal in 2021. To date, the levy has served more than 500,000 children and families. Joe is a storyteller who values relationships. He's valued the deep relationship with communities and people he's represented for the past 23 years. He certainly values being a leader in the Irish American community and definitely values only the best Irish breakfast tea. And most importantly, if you've ever worked with or alongside Joe, to him, you are family. James Joseph McDermott, you've been a great leader for our community, for our county, and for our state. Here's to you. Cheers.
Congratulations, Joe. Sure gonna miss you.
Cheers, Joe. We'll miss you.
Cheers, Joe. We're really gonna miss you, but we'll keep that D8 spirit alive. To you.
Cheers, Joe. We're gonna miss you. Good luck.
Hi, Joe. It's Annette. Cheers to you.
I know better than anybody that this is not coffee, it's tea. Congratulations and cheers.
You've done good, Joe. Congratulations. Happy trails.
Cheers, Joe. Congrats on an amazing career in public service.
Hi, it's me, Neville. Cheers, Joe. Thank you for everything, even though it was brief.
Hi, Joe. This is Bailey. I've got my Earl Grey tea here. Thank you so much for your service and everything you've done on the King County Council. Really excited to have this delicious cup of Earl Grey. Cheers, Joe.
Cheers, Joe. This is Lon. Thanks so much for everything. It's been a great adventure, and I promise to only drink Irish breakfast out of my cup.
Here's to my favorite public servant, and cheers to Joe, and wonderful 24 years of service, and love you a lot. Thank you.
So long to Joe. Take care.
It has been fun. It has been productive. We've done some really big, great things together as council members and colleagues. Congratulations, my friend, and I look forward to working with you in your next incarnation.
Thank you for your humanity, for your decency, for carrying your values into policy and into life. You've made a huge difference.
I really enjoyed it, watching him work for his constituents. Things like the water taxi across Elliott Bay to West Seattle wouldn't be there if it weren't for Joe McDermott working hard.
He's a person I regularly turn to for his balanced perspective, his highly polished level of sarcastic wit, and his huge heart for those struggling.
I've always looked up to him for his strong principles, his sense of history, but also his sense of humor. He is an unparalleled in terms of being witty.
Joe McDermott has been a trailblazer in the LGBT community. He was the first out LGBT member of the King County Council, but he also was a trailblazer in the legislature. People often get us confused. They call me Councilmember McDermott, and I say, no, that's the other good-looking gay council member.
Joe is super kind and thoughtful, but he also won't ever keep from you what he's thinking. And sometimes he can even be funny, but I wouldn't tell him that to his face.
We'll start on this end of the dais this time. And Councilmember Perry.
Thank you. From the time I first started, before I started, when I was in Jorge and Teresa's position, Joe agreed to meet with me, I think weekly, every other week, weekly, something to help me find my footing, to help me understand some of the nuances and answer questions, because I was had not legislated and did not know King County, and he was very, very generous and has been generous every time I've called. He picks up the phone every time I've asked for support in some legislation or some perspective. He absolutely is 100% there, and I have so appreciated the support, and you just hold a certain sort of balance on this dais, and I don't know what we're going to do without that. Both the humor, but also incredibly professional and incredibly focused on doing things the right way and making sure we get through the different pieces. And I just really value you, Joe, and I hope that we continue our friendship. And I wish you all the very best. I'm sorry it's only been 2 years for me.
Before we advance, I apologize. I got a note earlier. Make Joe open gift in front of him before speeches, but after video.
What could it be?
Yes. Oh, cup of Joe. I think we all should get one of those.
Yes, a hot item of the holiday season.
We can get this one.
No, it's a standard issue.
I'm a little distraught. I'm not sure how I'm going to go on without my buddy here. I remember being in these chambers when you were first sworn in. It was a snow day, and those of us who had made it to work, those few mighty of us who made it to work, came down here in our snow clothes. I was wearing my caribous, and we got to cheer you on. And I remember the very first thing we talked about. You said, one of your clients over in work release is harassing my chief of staff. You have to do something about it. That was our first interaction. But I love to tell people the story of the first really substantive thing that we worked on, because I think it is just so. It tells the story of why I have grown to trust and respect you so much as a colleague and a friend. So we were having a difference of opinion between the county and the city of Bellevue, where I was at the time. I won't bore you with the details, but it had been well hashed out, and there was no solution in sight. So they dispatched me. I was the mayor at the time. I don't know if you were the chair of the council or the budget chair, but they dispatched me to come see you. And I knew coming in that Joe had heard everything there was to hear about this issue and was probably sick of it. So I said, rather than me trying to convince you why the city's right and the county's wrong, how about we just tell each other's argument? And you agreed. You were totally game, and you did. And just proved that he had listened. He told me my position in a great amount of detail and with a great amount of empathy. And then I told him the county's position as best I could. And this led to us coming up with a solution that ultimately worked. And so, but that was my introduction to Joe as a colleague, was somebody who you could trust with what you really think, what you really care about, and not worry about him using it against you. And in fact, would take that openness and transparent communication and use it to try to get to yes. And so we developed just the most trusting relationship that I think I've had with a fellow elected official in my time as an elected official. I can't tell you all how many hours I have spent in the blue chairs in Joe's office, like especially after hours, going down the hall and just flopping in the blue chair, like, I don't know if you've got something to do, but we're going to talk. And it's already been mentioned, the sense of humor. This can be a dry job. We sit here for hours and hours and hours on end. I was once advised by a mentor that to be a successful elected official requires a cast iron butt. These are long meetings. And Joe will he'll just constantly, he keeps a stream of snappy patter going through the meetings and loves it when you laugh, when he makes you laugh on Zoom, like, ha, made you laugh. But look at the teams. Joe's got this talent. I don't know if people know, of putting together really strong teams. Those folks who all worked for Joe on that video include the current deputy county executive, the GM of Metro Transit, a very important and effective administrator at the Regional Homeless Authority, and more and more and more. You are leaving behind a legacy of people who are going to really help to keep our region successful long after you are doing something very highly paid in the private sector. So and then the last thing I want to say is watching you on this dais always be unafraid to stand up for your values when somebody was saying something that needed pushback, that needed to not be just accepted quietly. You have a wonderful way of just making sure that people understand what the value is in this room, and without being argumentative about it, but never ever letting people think it's okay what we're hearing. And I'm not talking about Alex Zimmerman right now. But then you also understand that legislation and, in fact, driving change and good things into the world requires compromise. You know how to take the win. And that combination of qualities that you bring, Joe, just makes you an incredibly, incredibly effective leader and legislator, and I am going to miss you tremendously.
Well, I think I've known Joe McDermott since I was a teenager, as we came up together in the Democratic Party. And Joe had a much earlier and more successful legislative career in Olympia first, and you can see why. He leads not only with his heart and his values, but he uses his mind to put them into action. And I, as you know, Joe, wouldn't be on this county council but for you. And I will always be deeply appreciative of your willingness to bring me on, to appoint me initially to this role. And when I came on, the support that you and your office gave us to kind of get ramped up will never be and hasn't ever been forgotten. One of the things that has always impressed me about you is your budget writing skill. You have just had a knack to be able to take a huge, complex budget, which I've worked with you many times on, and put it together and deliver it. And those budgets have always represented your values. Councilmember Balducci mentioned it, that I think when I think of you, I think of someone who does not compromise on his values. You compromise to get things done, but they never are at the expense of your firmly held values. And those values include looking out for folks that traditional systems of government and power structures have not always looked out for. And some of that's, I think, because you've experienced it personally in the most deeply personal way that one could. And you, in your career, have led institutional change and societal change to make sure that everybody, no matter who they are, no matter how they were born, no matter what their views or where they came from, is respected, included, and their dignity is lifted up. And I think that's what I will remember, I think, most about you and know about you. As much as you like history and as much as you love West Seattle, I think there's one place in the world that you might love more, and that's Ireland. And it was repeatedly spoken about your love of tea. And I'm not saying what's in here because I'm not sure we're supposed to have it in the courthouse. But this is a little gift from the nation of Ireland, which you're welcome to put in your cup of joe when you're not ready to have a cup of tea.
I was trying to think of when we first met, and I think it's Joe and I were both the respective chairs of our Democratic Party legislative districts at the same time. And our districts were right next door. He was chair of the 34th District Democrats. I was chair of the 33rd District Democrats. And I feel like I've sort of followed Joe throughout my career at ever since that time. As was mentioned, Joe was a trailblazer in the LGBTQ community, becoming the third ever openly gay or openly LGBTQ legislator in the history of the state of Washington. And it was a big deal back then. Now it's a snoozer. But back then, you know, when then Senator Murray was appointed just a few years before you, every TV network covered it because of the novel nature of it. And so it wasn't easy at the time, and you went through an appointment process. And as Joe was going through that, I was preparing to go through an appointment process as an out gay legislator who's the chair of the local legislative district from the district next door. So that's what I mean. And I remember some phone calls with Joe, with him sharing his personal experiences, both with coming out, but also, quite frankly, just political advice on going through that process. And then we served in Olympia together, and I always associate you in Olympia with education issues. I think that was kind of where you made your mark on the K-12 committee and some other leadership roles. And I wasn't kidding when people would always confuse us. It was always the Republicans. No, there's one, I'm trying to remember her name. Okay. Okay, I had been off the education committee for several years, and she would always stop me in the hallway and start talking about amendments and things, and I'd have to stop her and say, no, I think that's Councilmember McDermott. He's just from Gig Harbor. You know, I was always impressed. Joe, you always seem composed. You know, this place can be frazzling, and I'm just assuming it's like that anecdote with a duck, where it's calm on the surface and paddling underneath. But even in Olympia, when things were frantic, you could always come by your office. Your office always was clean. There was a sense of order. You always had a kind of a calmness about you that I think it made you easy to talk to and inspired confidence in the people around you. And you know, I always hated it when we're on other sides, because I consider you a good friend, and there's nothing more awkward in politics than having different policy agendas, often because we represent different districts with different interests, and having to be at policy odds with people who you feel so strongly about personally. And so I always hated that when we were on other sides of things, and it really enjoyed it when we got to do some things together. Particularly, I know we worked on some stuff for Beery, and we both represented part of that area. Your sense of humor, someone described as wry, which is accurate. You'll think, like, is he serious? And all of a sudden you'll have a smirk. You're like, oh, what's... It was how to make your eyes roll. Like I said with Jeannie, you're also really good at this, and I think we've all learned from your ability to get things done. And you have one of the attributes I admire most in elected officials, which is approaching the job with a sense of place. I think we all want to be movement politicians to some degree on issues, but I think the most important part of this job is being a fierce advocate for your community. And Joe's always approached this with a sense of place as kind of the kid who grew up in the district he represents and has deep roots there and cares passionately about the issues and the people in his district. And so when we talk about the term community, I think he applies that term in a very personal way. So I can't wait to see what you do next. I hope you make lots and lots of money. And congratulations on an awesome political career.
Well, I just spoke a few minutes ago about Joe. On the video that was shown, it got cut off before I said a couple of other things. I had mentioned Joe's wit. What didn't show up was I said something about how his wit, his humor, was very sardonic and sarcastic, which Councilmember Perry mentioned too. But I also said, but God, I think we all lived in fear, or we live in fear of being the object of Joe's humor. I know I did many times. But again, Joe's just been a wonderful colleague in the House and the Senate and here on the council. I'm kind of glad we're leaving together, so maybe we'll develop a different type of relationship than such a professional one. But best to you, Joe. I've loved serving with you.
When it comes to Joe, I've made a pros and cons list. Cons,
Which
Joe.
side is longer?
they're equal.
Okay.
So cons, Joe can sometimes be very chatty up here on the dais. Tells me a lot of jokes, and that's really funny. Another con, I'm very jealous of his socks. I don't know if you've all seen Joe's socks, but always like really cool patterns and characters, and I wear Nike tube socks with my suit, so I don't like that about Joe. Another con is I don't like that it's debatable who the tallest council member is. So Joe, I don't like that. I also don't like that people think you're the funniest one when people Dave, you always say that people confuse you for Joe. They always come up to me and start talking to me, and I'm like, oh, you're talking about the tall, funny guy. That's Joe. Pros. Joe, you have really great posture. I don't know if you all have noticed, but when Joe walks into a room, it's like a regal person has walked into a room because he's never slouching. He has that posture. I also like that you let me take over your office after you leave. Thank you for that. Another pro, I'm going to get serious now. I love that Joe is so transparent. Oh my gosh, like Sarah, you were saying earlier that you call him up to get a balanced view. This guy will never lie to you. He will never sugarcoat. He's very nice and kind and thoughtful, but it's straight to the point and direct, and that's really great. And this one, my favorite thing about Joe, he leads with his heart, but he's also very, very tough. And when I think of his district, District 8, I couldn't make a short list of the neighborhoods that are facing the most complex set of issues in King County without listing District 8. Honestly, probably the top 5 to 10 are all in District 8. You know, if I go through and list these, you're going to be like, all those are in the same district? Downtown Seattle, Pioneer Square, Chinatown International District, White Center, the airport, the adult jail, the youth jail, the Tequila asylee crisis. Like literally, like when you think of the most complicated issues in King County, they're all in Joe's district. And so having somebody who has the heart that he has, but also the toughness to really be direct and straight with you and collaborate and try to solve problems, I think the fact that this asylee crisis is happening and you've already jumped on it and led at the state level to get millions of dollars in funding to help people get housing who are living on the streets. That's just one small example of the way you've led in the most complex, toughest district in King County. Thank you for your service, Joe.
Joe, and Gene, I want to apologize. Apparently I was not in any of the videos, but I found out, I asked my staff when they did the videos and where was I, and apparently I was talking to Velma Valoria. Joe, it's hard for me to put into words how much I appreciate the opportunity to work with you the last 2 years in particular on KCIA. It's hard to put in words, but it's been constructive, and that was a good example of why Dave said what he said earlier about the fact that as a former legislator, colleagues both to your right, as if anybody would be to your right politically, they are people who understand that you have to give and take, and you've demonstrated that time and time again. When you first came on here, we had a great conversations about our Irish heritage. I'm half Irish, you're more than half Irish. And we talked about our mutual friend, Mr. Jameson, and I hope to see us to get together with Mr. Jameson soon after this. Thank you.
I know it's tough remotely, but Councilmember Dunn, if you would like to add something.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Hey, Joe, you need to know, Councilmember Zahala is right about the socks thing. I actually have a whole drawer of socks that are multicolored now because of you. I'm like, McDermott's got these great socks, so maybe I can do this. And you know me, I've got some fashion challenges. I'm kind of stuck in the early 1990s with the cowboy boots and stuff, but occasionally I got to whip out those socks, and I'm grateful for that. And you know, I'm just going to miss you. You're just a great guy and a great friend, and we don't necessarily agree on policy all the time, but I think we get along really well. And you know, you had my back in that newspaper article that one time. You know the one I'm talking about, and I really appreciate that, man. That is a stand-up thing to do, dude. You'll be missed for sure.
You know, we're at a moment in history where there's a lot of public cynicism about institutions and government institutions in particular. And every single one of us up here on this dais has our flaws and makes mistakes. But today, with the retirement of these two elected officials, I'm reminded of the fact that there are very decent human beings giving their life and service to their communities to make the world a better place. And I hope you'll join me in giving one final round of applause to Councilmember Jeannie Cole-Wells and Councilmember Joe McDermott. Yes. And before we adjourn, I would like to turn the microphone over to Councilmember Joe McDermott.
Thank you, Dave. I first interned for my King County Council member, Greg Nichols, in the summer of 1988. And I got to work with Susan Hannibal and Tim Cease in supporting and learning and seeing public service up close and serving constituents. And what I saw were the values that I knew I already had. It was, even at the time, I wondered if maybe it was too simplistic, but the way I articulated it at the time and would still today is that I believe that you could do more positive impact for more people in the public sector than you could in the private sector. And I was committed to a career in public service. Interning for this council, my first paid job in government, summer of 1988, further confirmed what I wanted to do as a career. And those values and the work we do here, it's often quiet and sometimes routine work that the council delivers on week after week, but it does impact people's lives. We shouldn't underestimate that for a minute, even when it is not routine and it isn't quiet. In fact, last week's meeting, we had one meeting in one afternoon, colleagues, and it took the Seattle Times 3 articles over 2 days to cover everything we did in one afternoon. I loved that. But let me also be clear. There are things that need to be done differently here. And as I go out the door, I'm not afraid to tell you 2 specific things that I think need to be done different on this council. First is to the public, to our staff, and to you, my colleagues. For the record is a superfluous phrase. It has no meaning. It isn't magic. It doesn't do anything. Don't use it. Just state your name and your affiliation and start talking. You don't have to say for the record. And secondly, maybe is even a little bit more pointed. Secondly, it's to my colleagues. One does not move legislation. One moves adoption of legislation. If you need a story to drill this into your head, think about former Majority Leader Lynn Kessler asking you, when you just finished moving legislation on the House floor, where are you moving it to? You move adoption of the ordinance. You move the committee, give a due pass recommendation to the ordinance. You don't move it. Where are you moving it to? And while we are on important topics like this, I also want to share that you learned some truly insightful things as you announce your retirement from public office. I had a central staffer take me aside last month and told me that I was their spouse's favorite council member, in part because of my sense of humor. And don't worry, I'm not naming any names, in part because I'm well aware that that was just a smokescreen. That central staffer actually was trying to communicate to me in a subtle way that I was their favorite, not just their spouses. But back to the values that really are why we're here. So much of what I could talk about accomplishments here at the County Council have already been talked about in the video presentation. Marriage equality, secure medicine return, best starts for kids. They did leave out the water taxi, the passenger-only terminal at Coleman Dock, which is a story in and of itself. But beyond that, since 2020, spurred by some extraordinary circumstances, the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd, we have done some amazing work around our values on this council and as a county. We've acknowledged and identified racism as a public health crisis. And we have made some historic investments in under-resourced communities, particularly BIPOC communities. We were able to do this because we had those unprecedented funds from the federal government to address the pandemic. The challenge is going to be, and I think some of those investments have been long overdue, and I think it's an excellent frame for us to do our public work. And I think it's going to be a real challenge to continue to do that as the federal pandemic funds, the Clifford and ARPA funds expire and have been spent on the worthy causes we invested in, to be able to find ways to continue that important work in that frame. Because as that money, that new source of money dries up, we will be back to our regular revenue sources. And there will be those who will want to defend the status quo. And I suggest that we continue to work to honor those values that we have identified and invested in the last 3 years in significant ways in the coming years. Each of you in your own way do that and deliver on that every day, and I really appreciate the opportunity to serve and work with each of you. And we're supported by some outstanding central staff throughout our entire legislative branch, whether I'm your favorite or not. I've been particularly, to single out two people by name, I've been particularly in recent weeks really flattered by John Taylor and Leo Floor, because one of the fears when you announce you're not running for re-election is you're going to be taken for granted and not engaged with. And even in very recent weeks, both have been scheduling meetings with me, updating me on things that I won't vote on, but have been engaging and making sure that they were engaging. Everyone has, and those two in particular in ways in the last very recent weeks. And I couldn't be doing any of this work. It hasn't been my work. It's been the work of a team of people I've had the pleasure of working with over the years, my staff, policy advisors, legislative aides, interns, chiefs of staff, but more importantly, friends, and every one of them confidants as well. Ann Birkeland, Chelsea Peoples, Michelle Allison, Casey Bloom, Lon Wen, Carrie Avia Mooney, Melissa Bailey, Bailey Burgess, Ella Williams, Helen Dahl, Sophie Smith, Ben Crother, Davin Simmons, Josie Peterson, Annette Slonin, Neville Abram, and Shannon Braddock, and Grant Lamont. It's been a pleasure working with every one of you and carrying on the values that we carry with us to work every day. I've had the pleasure of representing the community I grew up in throughout my career in public service, which is a real grounding experience. And I thank my constituents for the opportunity to do that work. And most deeply, I thank my family for the foundation that they've given me in being who I am. And I thank my husband, Michael. Michael and I started dating just about a year before I first ran for public office. It was no surprise to him when the opportunity came up just a year into our relationship that I was running for public office. But that means we've truly been doing this together over the entire tenure of my public career of 23 plus years now. And Michael, you've borne more of it than anyone would realize, and I truly appreciate everything you've done for me and you've done for our community. Thank you. And I thank all of you for this opportunity and look forward to staying in touch with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.